Due to technical issues during the first broadcast of Rooting in the Landscape Session 3, this is a re-recording of the program. Wendy is on the line with me and we'll be making comments from time to time. Hello everyone, welcome to Session 3 of our program, Rooting in the Landscapes. It's called Origins, the Cosmos. But before we begin today's program, what I wanted to do was to thank Wendy for her introduction of HeartMath to us. As we go through and do this work with the landscapes, it's really essential that we start making our connections through the heart. And in so doing, it's great to have a tool to help us get into the heart space, to be calm and still and centered, so that we can begin to perceive in different ways and be open to these perceptions. So Wendy, thank you so much for that help with HeartMath, that presentation. And I just wanted to share with everybody, I do have a grid, the grid Wendy talked about, the stimulating, the relaxing, the cortisol, the DHEA grid. It's on my refrigerator, and we each have a magnet here in the house and have the opportunity to plot where we are at any given time on that grid so that we can be truly aware of how our body is functioning within our place, within this space where we live. So thank you, Wendy, for that. There are other comments I wanted to make. First of all, just kind of a check-in. I am not prodding, poking, or whatever, but there were a couple of journeys that were possible to take at the end of our session 2. The journey was, how can I enhance my perception of space, or how can I recognize an opening to sacred space? And we did hear a little bit of commentary throughout the week that people were finding that sometimes just paying a little more attention to tending their place was a helpful insight that they got from the journeys. Another little exercise was the threshold exercise. I'm checking in to find out with you, what was it like crossing and noticing thresholds? As we begin to do that, we begin to have a sense of just how aware we are of transitions in space. And something I did want to share with everybody was, at one point, I had asked for some help as Dana and I were traveling. And I believe it was my teacher mentioned to me that it was important to take time during those transitions to even take 5 breaths. Mostly this seemed to be applicable to airports, moving from a terminal space to a baggage claim space to the rental car space, to help center and ground and be aware in different spaces. So I don't know what your experience was of the threshold exercise. Just wanted to share a little bit of that with you as well and get you thinking, keep you thinking about thresholds, how we cross from one space to the next, and what you may or may not recognize as you do so. Okay, well, I think we're just about ready to begin. And as I said, today is the Origins, the Cosmos. But before we dip into the actual material of the day, I want us to take a little time once again to settle down and settle in and orient ourselves to the present. We're learning to orient and navigate in space, and so much of our time is involved with moving from place to place that it's very challenging to stay in the present. We're thinking about where we've just been and where we're going. So right now we have this moment of now. So let's all get here now. To do this, we're going to work with our altar again. And you probably have your altar set up. If not, please feel free to set it up or tweak it as you'd like. And take a moment to look at it. And you may be smiling, remembering the fabric where you got it or the object of beauty. And if you have a moment, and if you're allowed to in your space, light your candle. If you can't light your candle, remember that you can always imagine it with a flame and warmly glowing. As we light this candle, we welcome in the light, and we sense the connection we all share via the flame. The flame reminds us that we are the light. We shine our light forward, and it forms the web that supports us and allows us to open to greater and deeper aspects of ourselves. So let's take a moment to enjoy this light, this beautiful light of the candle. And while we do so, recall for a moment, if you will, that as we began this journey, I spoke of it as a pilgrimage. We were all pilgrims moving through our landscapes. And as we do so, recall that this is a journey of the heart. We're teaching the heart to see. Advancing the slide. Now that we've got our physical space set, let's set our minds, bodies, and spirits. And we'll begin our little meditation. First, let's begin with the idea of meditating like a mountain. This is about settling in and settling down. As always, find your space or place in a chair or cushion on the floor. You're in a place to be. Notice your posture. Your spine is like a stack of coins. Close your eyes and imagine that you are a mountain. Time for you is eternal. You take your seat. Your posture becomes imperial and commanding. You rest in this for a few moments. You feel what it's like to have this seat, to hold this posture. Consider, what is it like to meditate like a mountain? Now, let's orient toward beauty. In one tradition, we meditate like a poppy. However, you have an object of natural beauty on your altar. Use it as your focus for beauty. Meditate like it. Sense it in as many ways as possible. If you wish, reach out to it physically and touch it. What is it to meditate like this object from nature? Rest in this connection for a few moments. Can you notice where you're having thoughts about your object? Is this action somewhere in or near your head? Elsewhere? See if you can move that action into the area of your heart. Gently. And extend to your object from this place, sensing the beauty and the light. Now ask yourself, what is it like to meditate like this gift from nature? We've established our seat. We've sensed beauty. Now, let's meditate like the ocean. The ocean is a vast landscape. It's a place of great cycles and tides. It's a major source of the oxygen we breathe. As we meditate like the ocean, we notice our breath. We breathe deeply into our bellies and slowly exhale. We breathe in. We exhale. Slowly, rhythmically, like the waves of the ocean coming to shore and receding. In and out. Find your pace. Meditate like the ocean. Finally, we meditate like a bird. Birds and other animals often murmur and vocalize in contentment. For some, this vocalization is a prayer or invocation of the Creator. For us, it is also the sound we make that connects us to Mother Earth. Her vibration is always with us. Tone or hum softly on your exhale. Feel the vibration of your delicate humming move throughout your body. As you hum, extend your awareness out from your body to encompass your altar, the room you're in, the neighborhood, your city, the countryside, as far as you can. Feel the hum vibrate inside. Feel the hum move outside. When you have extended as far as you can, hold that sense of extension for a moment and notice, is your toning or humming still audible? Or is it entirely internal now, still vibrating, still moving? Let's rest here for a few moments. And if you wish, you may slip into silence. Slowly, slowly, pull yourself back from where you've extended. Bring yourself back from the birds, the ocean, beauty, and the mountain. With this new sense of peace and calm, stretch, wiggle your fingers and toes, and open your eyes. Advance slide. Welcome once again to our online workshop. We're dealing with origins, the idea of the cosmos. And there's nothing more appropriate to this, I think, than this quote from Carl Sagan. His quote really puts our minds around, as best as they can go around, this idea of where we are in the cosmos, in the universe. He says, look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Thank you, Carl. I think you said it all for us. So as we contemplate this idea of this pale blue dot hanging out in the universe, I want to review for a minute the two things that we've done so far as we've examined our relationship to Terra, this pale blue dot. In session one, we looked at our belonging and connection. We looked at ceremonies that people performed that really tied them to the earth in a very conscious, aware way, in a way that we don't often have today. And we were able to take a journey to find out if there was some way that we could lock that in for ourselves. In the second session, what we did was we looked at how we actually interacted with that pale blue dot, how we respond to and perceive. And we did this through our exercise of walking our neighborhood to understand how many different streams of information come into us as we pursue our lives on that dot. Well, today we're going to look at that dot in the cosmos. The word cosmos means universe. Next slide. And as we look at the idea of the cosmos, there's something really interesting that Mircea Eliade has written about this idea of the cosmos and the universe. As he wrote, he said, "To settle somewhere, to inhabit a space, is equivalent to repeating the cosmogony, and hence to imitating the work of the gods. It follows that, for religious man, every existential decision to situate himself in space, in fact, constitutes a religious decision. He not only cosmicizes chaos, but also sanctifies his little cosmos by making it like the world of the gods." And that's a really big piece of philosophy to wrap our minds around. But as we begin to do that, we see reflections of the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. Man, as he understood the gods, as he looked out into space, looked out into the cosmos and the universe, wanted to have some sense of that order conveyed in his own life, in his own space. And in trying to do that, it's like pulling down what's above to below and making it so in the same way. And what we notice as people do this is there seems to be layer upon layer of increasing orders or decreasing orders of things in our universe, different levels of organization. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to session 4. But for the moment, the idea is that humans wanted to make their world like the world of the gods. Advance slide. So here we are with this idea of the cosmos and the universe. There are many different ways to look at the universe and many different studies. So we have things like cosmogony, which is the science that studies the origins of the universe. We have cosmology that looks at the universe as a whole. And we have cosmography. It's the science that maps general features of the universe. As we look at this and begin to understand that our attention is often up and away, we're reminded that our attention can go down and in to Mother Earth. And our intention is not so much to focus on Mother Earth and follow the pull of her gravity, but to look at her place in space, to look at the idea of the gods and how we replicate that here in our place that we share with Mother Earth. So to do this, the best way we have to do it is to track through word and story. How did our species come to be? This is a big question. How did we find our place within the grand scheme? What about the places we encounter as we move through the space we live in? How did they come to be? How do we reconcile that sense of them as in place being out there and what we have inside? What do we do? How do we make it come together? And once again, it's through story and word. We begin to understand this. People through the ages have made up stories or have brought stories back from their trips to the other worlds to explain these kinds of things. Advance slide. What I propose for us today is to look to Alice Alice of Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, to help us access some of these stories. Alice was a very brave little girl, and in this particular movie, Alice in Wonderland of 1933, she found herself very bored in the sitting room, I believe, of an auntie. And this photo shows Alice as she has already hopped up onto the mantelpiece above the fireplace and has pushed her way and is beginning to push her way through the mirror to the world on the other side of the mirror. And this is a possibility to us. This is a gift from Alice. She's teaching us that we can do this. So knowing that this is a capability, let's go visit an art museum. Advance slide. Find yourself comfortable, and we'll begin here, taking a walk into the Gallery of Beginnings. This is an art museum, and you've entered it on a very hot day and feel wonderfully embraced by the coolness in this gallery. You've found this squirreled away in the back of the museum, away from the major portraiture, the major sculptures, and you find yourself alone in this gallery. For a moment, you sit on a bench and you gaze at the wall and wonder. Gallery of Beginnings. And decide that you wish to explore these paintings more closely to see if you can discover something within them. You stand from the bench and you approach the first frame on the left. Underneath the painting, you see the word Maggot Power, Australia. You walk closer to the painting and you begin to see colors resolve. The reds, the sharp colors of sandstone. You see a desert. You actually see the outline of a continent. But the closer you get, you begin to see a landscape. Advance slide. You enter into this landscape, looking at it closely. You step back, you go closer to perceive it better. And as you go closer and lean into it, you discover that you can penetrate the picture as your nose goes into it to inspect that little bit of tree. You pull back, you look around to see if you're being followed or observed. You're still alone. And slowly, like Alice, you push your hands through the canvas and discover that you can step over the frame and into the picture. You're immediately struck by the heat of the place and the brightness of the sun. Wanting to know that you can return by reversing your course, you take a rock at your feet and make sure that you place it where you've entered. And then you begin to look across a vast space. In the distance, you can see a being moving across the land. The being is indistinct, but you can feel great age radiating from it. You know that you are observing an ancient one. This ancient one is walking across the land calling out, "I am, I am." And at each call of "I am," something new comes into being. And there's song. You can see the song and hear the song as the ancient one walks. You know that these are the song lines of creation and that they must be tended for the world to be maintained. Soon you see the ancient one disappear into a hazy bank of light in the distance. You look around to see where you might be and discover that you're not alone in this place. There's another being on the land, an old one, but not an ancient one. This is an ancestor, and he is struggling. You see the song of the place, and it isn't smooth. It's not structured like the songs of the ancient one. And you see maggots writhing on the ground. From your safe vantage point, you watch as the ancestor gathers the maggots and stuffs them under a huge rocky hill. When he's finished his task, the line of song eases into harmony, and the maggots are confined. The whisper you hear on the wind is Maggot Hill. You sense that it's time to leave this place, so you retrace your steps easily, and you find your rock marker. Glimmering faintly through a mist, you see the museum gallery on the other side. You step back through the picture into the coolness of the museum. It's such a contrast to the heat you felt within the picture of maggot power. Advance slide. You take a moment to catch your breath, blink, rub your eyes, see where you are. Noticing that the gallery is still alone, you decide to investigate the next picture. Here, under the picture reads, Belake Kulit Peluit, Borneo. You gaze into a landscape of mountains, rainforests, and rivers. You hear the sound of a bird, the hornbill, as you look to find it in the picture, and you brush into and through the canvas, discovering once again that this painting is permeable. You look around and quickly step over the frame and into the dampness of the forest. You drink in the richness of life and sound and notice human voices nearby. Spotting a trail through the foliage, you walk upon it, closing in to a group of people. In the magical way of picture stepping, you enter into a rapport with the people, knowing what they know, experiencing what they experience. You gain an understanding of just how important their rivers are, how dependent upon these rivers the people are for their food and their lives. You sense, though, that there's something else. You walk along and the conversation is light. There are children present, and they are being taught the names of places. You sense that this is very important to the people, that somehow the name of a place is a record, a way of remembering something. Your walk continues, and you absorb the smells and the sights. Your suspicion is confirmed when you hear the story of a place called Belake Kulu Pelu It. As the people pass this place, a story is told to the children of a man called Lake Kulit. It was in this place that he fell asleep and tumbled down the hill and died. The children will remember him. The place, as you understand it, is the place where Lake Kulit tumbled down. That's what the name means. Other places are pointed out to the children. They learn a way to talk about the dead by naming the place where the deceased is buried or where they had died. And they name these places for a nearby river. You see, it's not good to talk of the dead directly. The people drift away into the forest. Once again, you decide it's time to return. You retrace your steps, and you see the glimmer of the gallery once again through the picture frame. And you step quickly back into the museum. Once again, the cool air feels good on your face after your time in the rainforest. You breathe deeply, and you look around, pleased to find that you're still alone. One picture remains to be explored. Advance slide. You walk to the picture and read the sign. Whiteness spreads out, extending down to water. Apache lands. You study the picture and see a mountainous region with dead oak wood on it. Trusting in the experiences you've already had, you confidently raise your foot and just put it through the picture, easily stepping into the scene. You're deep within the landscape now, at a sandstone cliff next to a spring. Close by, you notice a young girl collecting dead oak. It's hot, and you can see the girl is getting tired. She picks up her bundle and begins to walk away downward, and you know that she's headed home with her burden, and she's not paying attention. You follow her, and suddenly a sharp crack rips the air. The girl falls and lies still upon the ground. You race to her side and see that a rock she stepped on has broken, and that her fall has knocked her unconscious. You're unable to help her, but you decide to watch over her until she recovers. In a short time, the girl rouses and collects her wood. She's cut on her cheek and chin. She slowly continues her journey until she's back at her camp. When she arrives, her mother talks to her about keeping alert during hard work and about anticipating dangers. There is a lesson here, captured in the name of the place. Whiteness spreads out, extending down to water, is now not only a place name and a place, but a reminder to avoid being careless. You understand the lesson and decide that it's time to leave this picture. You make your way back up into the mountain to the sandstone cliff by the spring and find the glimmering picture frame. You step back through it and into the gallery and sigh. There are no more pictures to explore today. You sit on the bench in the center of the large room to absorb all that you have witnessed. Advance slide. So take a moment to wiggle your fingers once again, stretch, take a deep breath, and open your eyes. We're back in the gallery of beginnings, having learned some lessons. Advance slide. What we've just learned through a lot of these stories, there's a lot that we've learned through the stories. We had three very distinct experiences within the pictures. The first one in Australia was a creation story. It talked about the ancient one who walked the land called I Am, bringing things into being. We found an ancestor who, through his actions, created a place, and we understood by his actions that maggots were captured underneath the hill, and so we had the idea of what had happened in that place in that time. We saw in Borneo that events in family history, people dying, people being buried, people experiencing various situations, genealogies, were recorded in names of places that flanked rivers. And in the third, in the Apache lands, we were exposed to a cautionary tale, a tale that had a moral lesson. All of these kinds of things are captured in a place name. So toponym is a place name, usually derived from a geographical feature, and it becomes something that underscores an event, a relationship between people and place that we normally might not have if we just called it that hill over there or that path there or this river here. There's much more to a name and a place. And what I'd like you to do too, if you would please, is on your worksheet. It's page 3 in my printout, but it's titled Deeper Meanings. When we look at toponyms, they not only can give creation stories, an idea of origin, genealogy, family history, cautionary tale, moral lesson. But we also see that a name can create attachment. So people who were walking in Borneo and knew that someone died in a particular place, whatever, they had an attachment to that place because of it. So a toponym can create attachment. And we also learned from the Borneo example that a toponym can become a protective device in that using it, the name of a place, can somehow protect and insulate people perhaps from various situations. So I guess I'll just put forth the question with a couple of quotes. Shakespeare said, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." He's saying it's not really important what you call something. It is what it is. Yet Montgomery, who wrote Anne of Green Gables, says, "I read in a book once that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, but I've never been able to believe it. I don't believe a rose would be as nice if it was called a thistle or skunk cabbage." So it's up to you. I don't know what you think, Wendy, if you're still listening. What are your thoughts about names? Do you think they're important? Do you think...
I think it's a great question. There's a lot of studies that are starting to look at things like people tasting wine in expensive bottles versus the same exact wine in a bottle that appears to be an inexpensive bottle. And people have a very different experience of the wine based on looking at the bottle and based on what they believe the price point to be. So applying that to the roses, I got to believe if you're not calling it a rose, it's not going to be as pleasant to me.
Interesting. Yeah. So it does show, that's a great comment, because it does demonstrate that we as humans attach significance to things. And the name is one of the ways in which we attach this significance. And so paying attention to the way we name things, the way we talk about things, can explain a lot to us about our attachment. But it can also explain a lot to us about the attachment of the people who were doing the naming. And what I like to think about are some place names that we're familiar with just within our own areas, regions. And I think we talked a little bit about Chapel Hill yesterday. Wendy and I were having the conversation. And what were you saying, Wendy, that you had the sense that maybe there was more significance to that name than just a town there with Research Triangle?
So I have always believed, we live in a hilly town, so the hill part makes sense, and I've always wondered where the chapel is that gives us our name. We're a small town, we're a university town, so it seems logical that the place name means something. Yet I've never had anyone point to a chapel or anybody tell me, what it is. So this conversation is making me think I have to get off the phone. After I get off the phone, I have to Google it and find out what the answer is.
Yeah, and the whole hilly region, because you're right, Chapel Hill is next to Hillsborough. So it obviously, there's some real significance to it being a hilly area, the fact that they're naming it. I think not just because it's hilly, but somehow hills are important, it seems. And then the other question I had was how we use names to create attachment. There was one study, and I can't remember the name of the chap right now, who I believe he was an Asian man. He'd gone to visit Asia. He came back to his home base in Salt Lake City, and he realized that places have meaning when you do have attachment or you create an attachment to them. And as I was looking at the map of Australia, it was pretty interesting to see some of the names of the places that really demonstrated a connection to the UK. For example, there were places with names like Queenstown, Stonehenge, Northumbria Hill. All of these kind of harken back to the old country. And so we use names to create meaning and somehow create significance. And then I decided to look a little further afield, come to our neck of the woods, and up and down the eastern seaboard, we still have a lot of names that take us back to the UK. We have places like New York, New Jersey. We have Rome, New York. Takes us right back to Italy. And of course, in Rome, New York, there were a lot of Italian immigrants who'd settled there. Just closer to home, we've got Queenstown and Cambridge. These are in Maryland. So naming places to make them more familiar, to create some attachment. And I just find that fascinating. And not everybody uses names in the same way. So those places in Australia, be they Lizard Man Hill or Queenstown, were named by particular people who shared a common understanding or cosmogony. So the Aborigines who would know a place such as Lizard Man Hill or Maggot Hill, because of their understanding of how the world was created and how things came to be, wouldn't have the same connection to a place like Queenstown, nor would the Brits, who were calling places Queenstown, have any connection to Lizard Man Hill. So they probably wouldn't even call them the same thing, which brings a great example to point here. In New Mexico, there's a great composite volcano mountain. It formed about 3.5 million years ago. It's known to a lot of different groups of people who live in its shadow. For the Anglos, it's called Mount Taylor. For the Acoma Native Americans, it is called Snow-Capped. For the Navajo, it's called Blue Bead. For the Laguna people, it's called Women in the Mist. And it's a really great example of the diversity expressed in toponyms that point to various groups' cosmological orientations. So I think that was one of my favorite examples of that. So we also have this idea of biography, genealogy with a name. Advance slide. But we also have bundles of information that can be conveyed with names. So for example, the Apache name of whiteness extends out, spreading down. I think I've got that right. It conveys a packet of information about being very careful when you're working, when you're tired, to pay attention, to not be hurt. So there's a moral to the story. For example, the Apache were speaking at one point in front of a researcher, Keith Basso, who was writing a book about wisdom sitting in places. And he was privy to a conversation in which a bunch of cowboy Native Americans had gotten together and were talking to a young man who'd really been acting out. And they exchanged a conversation in an abbreviated kind of language where they were talking about, well, you were like Old Man Owl. And he agreed, yes. And they said, oh, you got tired of running between two trees. And he said, yes. And now let's work. Very short version of the story, but it refers to a tale in which an old man was acting silly, came to his senses, and realized that he was behaving inappropriately. But if you didn't know that story and couldn't relate it to the place, the actual place that was named for the story and where the story allegedly took place, you would have been completely befuddled by the communication. So this is what the Apache have called speaking with names. We can do that sometimes too. For example, here's Waterloo. And as I was putting this together, I was thinking, okay, how do we speak with names? What are names that convey bundles of information? And when I thought about Waterloo, I thought about ABBA, the music group of the 1970s. They used this idea of Waterloo and Napoleon's surrender to speak about a personal destiny or a change in biography between two people, a romantic song and whatever. But was Waterloo conveyed the idea. And then at Little Bighorn, if you talk to anybody and say, well, that was his Little Bighorn, you know that there was a defeat, just as Custer had a defeat. Those of you who are familiar with the Hobbit stories know that if you talk about Mordor, that's a place you don't want to go. Bad things happen, fight with evil. And heaven, we all have certain kinds of connections, meaning, significance that we attach to heaven. So we even use it in language to say something like, ah, that's heavenly. And we know through the significance we attach to the place we call heaven that this means it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's satisfying, it's a sensual delight, perhaps. I don't know about you, Wendy, but do you have any place names that cross your mind that convey information to you? I kind of put you on the spot here.
I like being on the spot. The place that always occurs to me, and I'm not sure it's exactly what you're talking about, is California. Because
Oh,
I
sure.
think when we say California, I think that it brings very specific images to mind, especially for those of us on the East Coast. And I think it's probably very different specific images. But I think, there's comments like, oh, that's how it is in California, or gosh, that's outlawed in California, or sort of the image of the hippie times in San Francisco in the 60s, which I guess is showing my age maybe a little bit more than I want to. But I feel like that's a place that has a very strong identity associated with the word, and it's not a word that pops up in other kinds of conversations, I don't think.
Right. I think you're right. I think California does have some kind of sense to it. And I think over time it may have changed. I was thinking about this as you were speaking. The whole idea of California and the gold rush. There was a real rush to get to California. A lot of people at another period of time were kind of racing out of the Dust Bowl to get to California. So it was kind of a mecca. And here it is. There I'm using another language again, a mecca. The end goal, the heavenly goal of a lot of people to get to California. I got to go to California. So I think you're right. I think that does convey something of it. Of course, now we had a comment about the droughts and the water issues there, that California may not exactly have that same draw. It may be changing as we go through time. There were two other places that I didn't include on the slides that occurred to me afterwards. And I think they kind of pervade some of our thinking. If I were to talk about, it's a Garden of Eden, you really have a sense of something there, joy and innocence, perhaps. And then if I say, it's like it's like Atlantis. Atlantis it just brings up all sorts of thoughts about potentialities and whatnot. Yet with some of the understandings we have, there was some hubris there and it was destroyed. So we do use place names, I think, to express packets of information. And so in our own way, albeit not as developed as the Apache, I think we do speak with names. Advance slide. So I was going to just go on a little bit more to kind of explore this idea of moral to the story in Apache style, wondering if there is a way that we talk about certain places that have a moral to the story. And the one that I came up with as I was thinking, and you can see perhaps I'm very influenced by cinema, was Fargo. And the significance for Fargo for me was a reminder of a very nasty conspiracy based on greed. It was executed with complete ineptitude, and the whole thing fell apart. And the man who was trying to accomplish something ended up losing it all. So to me, the idea of Fargo does convey the moral to the story, simply put, that crime doesn't pay. Then I was also wondering, I don't know if you've got a story, Wendy, or if you want to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, I need to think on that one. Nothing's coming to mind. But maybe that's because it's 80 degrees out or 88 degrees out, and my mind like went to Fargo, and my brain got all cold, and it's in its happy place now.
That's terrific. Okay, well, advance slide. We'll move on here. So the other thing was about places and names in the Penan style. The Penan people are the people of Borneo who name things for events and family history and genealogy. Their biography is somehow encoded in the landscape. And something that I feel that I'm pressed to mention here is many of these places that the Penan have within their rainforest, these rivers, that the rivers are the basis that feeds them. They count on them so very much, but they're flanked by a lot of trees, the rainforest, and loggers have come in and have started to cut down the trees. And while the loggers are doing this, there's been some outcry from various groups saying, "Oh, you're interfering with their sacred territory." And it's been made clear that no, we're not calling this sacred. This doesn't relate to God, creator, spirit in that sense. But nevertheless, it's extremely important because it is our physical body of record keeping present in the landscape. These trees, these rivers, this landscape holds, by its very placement, by its significance to us, memories, the records, the what's the word I'm thinking about? The archives of our family. And so that's what's being destroyed when the loggers come in and start hacking things apart. However, that happens wherever we go, and not to say however as in to diminish it, but the story I was going to share about my family interpretive board focuses in on a parking lot. So if anybody talks about the church parking lot, the interpretive board that would be there would be the one that my mother would read out to us every time we'd pass it on the way to my grandmother's in New Hartford. That's the church parking lot where the church stood, where Dad and I got married. But they tore down that church to build a new church, and now where we got married is the parking lot. And there was always significance to that parking lot. Yet at some point, having it be a parking lot and not the church was somewhat a sensitive issue, I think. So I don't know, Wendy, if you have like a trailside board that you know that there's something, your family did this here. Like does anything come to mind? Again, I'm putting you on the spot, but.
No, that's fine. It's such an interesting thing for me to think about because I live so far away from where I grew up and where most of my family is, that I think we do have that, and we do have places like that we talk about, but we never go there anymore because even when I'm spending time with my family, they now live in a different town. So it's almost like a mythological, which I think might be part of your point, right? So there's the places, and they're part of our trail side signs, but they're not the trails we ever go to anymore.
Right. We lose some of those trails, and I think part of the exercise in looking at this, and I really appreciate you making that comment and having that observation, is that they still are a part of us, regardless of our visitation, regardless of the fact that we no longer make a pilgrimage to visit them, which is an interesting thought. They still are very important to us. They still make up part of who and what we are, and they give meaning and significance by virtue of their placeness. And I think that's really an interesting thing, especially in the light of the conversation we had, I think 2 sessions ago, where we talked about how many people actually live near where they were born, how many people actually have stayed. It's the idea of the transient society. While we may lose the actual physical connection with places, I think perhaps more than a very sedentary society, there's a greater import given to things that we no longer visit. It's just something to think about. So that was a great observation. So I guess that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about this week, this session. Although I do have to share one more quick story because I was really stumped at one point when I was thinking about a kind of creator story that might connect me to the idea of the ancient one or the ancestor. And the only thing that I could come up with that was kind of a what's so story, and maybe that's a good way to describe it, was when somebody says the Catskill Mountains. Growing up near the Catskill Mountains, the idea of Rip Van Winkle going up into the mountains and going asleep for 20 years was an enchanting story. And so whenever I hear Catskill Mountains, it immediately takes me to this idea of lost time and the ghosts bowling up there, and the bowling being the origin of thunder. So even today, when I hear thunder, it's back to the Catskill Mountains and the guys bowling. And that was the only thing I could think of that was within my cultural framework that was kind of a what's so story. Advance slide. So here we are once again to our final candle. And before next time, I'd like to suggest a little bit of homework just so that you can explore some of these kinds of stories and significance, how they relate to you, how they feel for you. The first is to write a Penan style story. This is the family trailside board that kind of, through a name, a toponym, you can convey a whole packet of information. I'll tell one story with this. For example, we say Bobby's tree in our family. And within a certain branch of our family, to say Bobby's tree, there's a whole story that goes with that. And the story is that's where my young cousin, second cousin, had actually had a collision with the tree after a football game. He was star quarterback. It was a great game. They won, lost control of the car, and ultimately it was a fatal accident. So Bobby's tree conveys all that information. Then the suggestion is to write an Apache-style story, something with a moral to the story. Another quick story. When I say Nana's barn or Nana's hayloft, I immediately go to the story of you don't mess around where you shouldn't. And that story has to do with my dad, young boy, playing in the hayloft, jumped down, bit his tongue to the point where it was hanging by a thread as he told the story. Ran into my Nana, who probably gave him a licking and then took a look at his tongue, gave him a shot of whiskey, and produced her sewing needle and sewed it back together. So the story goes. So that's the moral to the story of Nana's barn. Don't mess around where you don't belong. Have fun with those. I think they'll be great exercises, and perhaps they'll pull out something, some meaning and some significance to you that will be very helpful. A journey suggestion. Go to your teacher or power animal. Ask them how they would call the place where you live and why. And this might be insightful to you. Maybe it has something to do with a vision they have for you, a vision they think you might aspire to. A fun journey, I think. See what they say. And the last is more of a reminder. Next time we're going to be talking about some of these, earth, air, fire, and water. Earth, air, fire, water, yeah. And if you would make an alter adjustment to include an object for each of those. So you may decide that your candle, which is already present, is just fine. You may have a feather already, and that's air, and that's fine. But use your imagination and have a little fun with this too, and make the adjustments that you need to. Okay, so let's take a moment to wrap up our time together. Thank you so much for being with us. And let's take another moment to focus on our altars. There's a cloth. It provides a base defining a space. that you can occupy anytime you need to feel calm and centered. There's an object of beauty that ties you to nature and Mother Earth. And there's a candle, which represents your inner heart light that is part of a vast web of consciousness that extends in all directions and into all dimensions. Take a moment to breathe. Connect to the ocean, another metaphor for our participation in a vast ground of being. Know that what is a part of you is also a part of the ocean. Your very cellular makeup and your breath are all reflections of that great body of water that gives our mother her portrait in space. She is our pale blue dot, swirling through the cosmos, holding us as her children, and sharing with us her awareness and nurturing. Feel the power in the great systems of which we are a part. Power that flows to us as energy and intelligence. It is up to us how we approach and use that power. It is up to each of us to make wise choices as we step out into the world and interact with all the great forces of nature and life. Working with the land and the landscapes is an avenue to discover and understand our multidimensionality. It is a doorway to expanding and developing our consciousness. As we do this, we serve the world, our mother, and all our relations, the stones, the plants, the animals, each other, and our typically unseen cohabitants. Our hearts can grow and we can find the passion and courage to stand in our loving authenticity and be. Touch the earth, light your inner fire, and shine. And thank you for your time with us. And as always, if you have comments, questions about your journeys, you've got my email. Love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.